The story of the ancient oceans does not begin with the giants themselves. It begins much earlier, in a world that was unfamiliar, strange, and breathtaking in its own way. Long before plesiosaurs stretched their necks across sunlit waves, before mosasaurs opened their jaws to snap at fish, the seas were already ancient, holding mysteries that humans could hardly imagine. Picture a planet young yet old, its continents slowly drifting across the globe. Pangaea, the supercontinent, stretched like a vast quilt across the earth, its deserts burning under an unrelenting sun. Along its edges, shallow seas collected, warm and calm, fringed with early reefs built not by modern coral but by sponges and primitive reef makers, their shapes strange and sculptural. These waters were the quiet cradle of life, home to creatures both hardy and delicate. Tiny fish darted through the shallows, flickering like living shards of silver light. Trilobites, armored in patterned shells, scuttled along the sandy sea floor, their many eyes catching even the faintest glint. They had ruled for hundreds of millions of years, slowly giving way to newer, more daring forms of life. Above, the air was thick with oxygen, feeding lush forests along the shores and nourishing insects, some with wings so wide they would seem fantastical to us today. Life was learning to adapt, to explore new possibilities. Amphibians ventured further onto land, but they were tied to water, their eggs and skin demanding constant moisture. Reptiles, still small and tentative, carried within them a secret that would shape the oceans of the future: the amniotic egg. With this simple adaptation, they were freed from the water's edge. They could spread across dry lands, colonizing forests, deserts, and riverbanks. Yet some of these reptiles began to look back toward the seas. They saw not a threat but an opportunity. The oceans were vast, stretching beyond sight, filled with schools of fish, swarms of cephalopods, and the quiet promise of territory unclaimed by larger predators. To the brave and adaptable, the water was not a barrier but a stage on which to explore new ways of living. In these waters, currents carried more than nutrients. They carried lessons. Life experimented quietly, shaping forms that could glide, dive, and swim in ways the land could not support. Some reptiles ventured into the shallows, chasing fish or mollusks. Over generations, limbs transformed into paddles, tails flattened into rudders, and bodies streamlined for movement beneath the waves. And yet, even as these transformations began, the seas were still dominated by smaller creatures. Armored fish, early sharks, and invertebrates that formed dense, complex communities on reefs and seabeds. The rhythm of life was quiet but purposeful, a slow dance of predator and prey, of adaptation and survival. On land, the story continued. Forests of towering ferns and giant horsetails swayed in warm breezes. Insects buzzed, their wings catching sunlight as they patrolled the edges of lakes and rivers. Reptiles, still small and cautious, observed these forests, learning, growing, and preparing. Some would eventually return to the water, carrying with them the knowledge of survival on land and the potential to conquer the seas. In these first quiet moments, before the rise of marine giants, the ocean was a place of patient waiting. Currents moved, tides shifted, and life flowed in countless forms, each species finding its place in the tapestry. Evolution, like a careful storyteller, was setting the stage, preparing characters who would one day dominate these waters with size, speed, and elegance. As the Triassic period approached, the world shifted. Climate warmed, seas expanded, and the balance of life tipped toward experimentation. Reptiles increasingly explored the water's edge, slowly discovering that the ocean was not a prison but a home. Shallow lagoons became hunting grounds. Coastal reefs became nurseries. The stage was being set for creatures that would one day grow to lengths rivaling modern ships, moving through the seas with power and grace. But even in this early world, survival was never simple. Predators lurked. Storms swept across shallow seas. Life had to adapt, to learn, and to endure. The creatures that succeeded were those that could combine skill, patience, and flexibility. Lessons that the giants of the future would carry forward in every powerful stroke of a flipper, every snap of a jaw, and every careful hunt. And so, as the sun rose over these ancient waters, as tiny fish flickered in the currents and reptiles tested the shallows, the first hints of the ocean giants began to stir. The stage was set. The players were ready. The story of the ancient marine reptiles, of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs, had begun, quietly, patiently, and with endless possibilities stretching out across the waves. The seas waited, and life prepared for the rise of giants. The world that had existed before the giants was changing. The quiet oceans of the late Permian were beginning to give way to a new era, one of opportunity, experimentation, and transformation. Life, which had survived disasters and adapted in countless ways, was poised on the brink of a remarkable expansion. The Great Permian Extinction, the most catastrophic event in Earth's history, had left its mark on the planet. Over 90% of marine species had vanished. Coral reefs were shattered. Fish populations had dwindled. The once thriving ecosystems were reduced to near silence. Yet in that quiet, life found its chance. Nature, patient and unyielding, began to rebuild. Slowly, the oceans recovered. Warm shallow seas returned along the coasts of Pangaea, carrying nutrients and teeming with the first stirrings of renewed life. Ammonites and mollusks multiplied once more, their spiral shells and intricate patterns drifting like miniature monuments to resilience. Fish returned, their schools shimmering in silvery clouds across lagoons and reefs. Tiny predators hunted cautiously, testing the waters in this new age. It was in these waters that the first true marine reptiles began to emerge. Some were small, almost inconspicuous, their bodies still reminiscent of land-dwelling ancestors. But subtle changes marked the future. Limbs began to flatten into paddle-like shapes, tails lengthened and strengthened for swimming, and bodies became more streamlined. Evolution was experimenting, quietly, persistently, and with remarkable patience. Among the earliest pioneers were the gnathosaurs and placidonts. These reptiles tested the waters of life in a way no other creatures had before. Gnathosaurs, slender and agile, began to explore shallow lagoons, stalking fish and small cephalopods. Placidonts, slower and armored, grazed along reefs, crushing shellfish and clams with their powerful jaws. Each species had found a niche, a way to survive, and a path forward into a new age of oceans. The transformation was not only biological but ecological. Predators and prey began to form new relationships. Schools of fish learned to move in unison, avoiding the deadly strikes of newly emerging reptiles. Sheltered lagoons and shallow reefs became nurseries for young creatures, a place to learn the rhythm of the waves without falling prey to the first hunters. Currents carried food and lessons alike, shaping behavior, movement, and survival strategies. The seas themselves were changing. Climate shifts warmed the shallow waters, expanding the areas where life could thrive. Storms, once rare, became part of the natural rhythm, stirring nutrients and reshaping the seabed. Tides shifted slowly, carving channels and sandbars that would become critical hunting and resting areas for the first marine reptiles. In every ripple, every wave, the potential for new life was growing. Even on land, changes were stirring. Reptiles, emboldened by their success on dry terrain, continued to evolve and diversify. Some began to return to the water, carrying with them adaptations for swimming and hunting. The shoreline became a laboratory of evolution, where creatures learned to balance the demands of land and sea, a delicate dance that would lay the foundation for future marine giants. The Great Transformation was more than a recovery. It was an awakening. Life, resilient and patient, was experimenting on a scale that would shape the oceans for millions of years to come. In these shallow seas, in lagoons and coastal reefs, the first chapters of a grand story were being written. A story of courage, adaptation, and the quiet rise of giants. And so, as the sun glinted on calm waters, and the first gnathosaurs tested their paddles in gentle currents, the stage was set. The ancient oceans, once empty and silent, were beginning to hum with life once more. Currents carried not only fish and mollusks but also the promise of predators and hunters that would one day dominate the waves. In this great transformation, patience and persistence ruled. Every stroke of a tail, every glide of a flipper, and every cautious hunt was a step toward the age of marine giants. The oceans were waking. The story of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs was quietly beginning, one ripple at a time. The Triassic period was a time of quiet patience and hidden change. The oceans, which had survived the great extinction, were beginning to pulse with life once more. Shallow waters sparkled under the sun, stretching across the edges of Pangaea like ribbons of light, while gentle waves carried whispers of a world that was slowly learning to thrive again. Tiny fish darted through the sunlit shallows, their scales glinting silver in the warmth of the waters. Ammonites, spiraled and delicate, floated gracefully in the currents, turning and twisting as if dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. Beneath them, the seabed was alive with movement. Early crinoids swayed like underwater flowers, and small crustaceans scuttled over rocks and shells, oblivious to the slow rise of larger predators above. It was in these waters that the first signs of marine reptile dominance began to appear. Among the pioneers were the placodonts, slow and armored, grazing along the reefs. Their bodies, broad and low, seemed almost comical at first glance, yet every scale and plate was a testament to survival. With jaws lined with flat teeth, they crushed mollusks and shellfish with patient determination, moving steadily across the sand in search of hidden treasures. Nearby, the ichthyosaurs explored the waters with quiet curiosity. Their long necks and slender bodies allowed them to glide gracefully between rocks and shallow lagoons, snapping up small fish with sudden precision. Unlike the armored placodonts, ichthyosaurs moved with elegance, their limbs acting as paddles that propelled them through the water with minimal effort. They were the first true hunters, the beginning of a line that would one day evolve into the ocean's most graceful predators. The balance of life was delicate. Predators and prey were engaged in a silent dance, each learning the movements, rhythms, and strategies of the other. Schools of fish darted in unison to avoid detection, while the first reptiles tested their speed and agility in response. Currents shaped behavior as much as bodies did, teaching lessons about navigation, hunting, and survival. The seas themselves were alive with more than movement. Sunlight filtered through the water, creating patterns of shimmering light on the sandy floor. Waves lapped gently against coral-like structures and rocky outcrops. Currents carried warmth and nutrients, fueling plankton blooms that would feed countless creatures in the food chain. Even the simplest algae and seaweed were essential, creating habitats and providing sustenance for the smallest residents of these awakening oceans. Life was also spreading in new ways. Some reptiles that had once been land dwellers began venturing farther into the water, their bodies slowly transforming over generations. Limbs became flippers, tails lengthened, and bodies streamlined. These subtle changes were the quiet beginnings of what would one day become ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and plesiosaurs, the giants of the Mesozoic seas. It was a world of patience, where survival depended on both caution and experimentation. Juvenile reptiles learned to swim alongside currents, testing their endurance. Small fish discovered new hiding places among rocks and reefs. Predators honed their skills with each hunt, yet never with haste, for the oceans rewarded those who moved with rhythm, not recklessness. Season by season, year by year, the Triassic seas grew richer and more complex. Coastal lagoons became nurseries. Reefs teemed with invertebrates and tiny fish, providing shelter for the young and food for the cautious hunters. The first true marine reptiles patrolled these waters, balancing the need to feed with the necessity to survive. In this awakening, the stage was being set for something extraordinary. Evolution was quiet, invisible, yet unstoppable. Limbs transformed into flippers, necks lengthened for hunting, and jaws adapted to crush, slice, or seize prey. The oceans, once recovering from devastation, were now alive with experimentation, movement, and the promise of giants yet to come. And so, as the sun rose each morning over the Triassic seas, the water shimmered with potential. Placodonts grazed steadily along reefs, gnathosaurs glided like dancers, and the smallest fish learned to navigate a world filled with predators and light. Currents carried both food and lessons, shaping the creatures that would one day dominate the oceans with grace, power, and elegance. The Triassic seas had awakened. They were no longer silent or empty. Life had returned, quietly but determinedly, preparing the stage for the rise of marine giants, creatures that would glide, hunt, and reign in the oceans for millions of years. In this gentle, shimmering world, the first whispers of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs were beginning, their story patiently waiting to unfold beneath the waves. In the shallow lagoons and sunlit reefs of the Triassic seas, one group of marine reptiles captured attention not through speed or ferocity, but through curiosity, resilience, and remarkable adaptation. These were the placodonts, slow-moving, armored reptiles whose strange forms seemed almost alien, yet perfectly suited to their world. At first glance, placodonts might seem ungainly. Their broad, flattened bodies were covered with bony plates that resembled a patchwork of shields. Some species were almost turtle-like, their shells protecting them from predators, while others carried rows of knobby armor along their backs. But beneath this heavy exterior, life moved with quiet determination. Each tooth, each scale, each paddle-shaped limb was a testament to survival in a world full of currents, reefs, and ever-present hunters. Placodonts were primarily specialists in feeding on hard-shelled creatures. Mollusks, clams, and crustaceans formed the bulk of their diet. Using flat, crushing teeth and a strong jaw, they could break through the toughest shells with slow, steady movements. Unlike their faster, sleeker neighbors, they did not need to chase prey over long distances. Patience was their strength. They grazed along the reef, slowly navigating around coral-like structures, feeling the currents on their bodies, and carefully testing each shell before crushing it. Despite their slow pace, placodonts were clever. Their eyes, positioned to give a wide field of vision, helped them spot threats and opportunities alike. They knew when to hide among rocks and algae and when to emerge to feed. Their armored shells, while cumbersome, were perfectly shaped to resist attacks from larger predators. In a way, they were the calm philosophers of the sea, moving deliberately and observing their world with quiet vigilance. Placodonts also had fascinating interactions with their environment. Their grazing helped shape the reefs, controlling mollusk populations and creating spaces for smaller creatures to thrive. Tiny fish and invertebrates often swam close to them, protected from other predators by the presence of these armored giants. Even the currents seemed to guide their movements, carrying nutrients and small prey across the sandy bottoms, allowing placodonts to feed without haste. In addition to their feeding habits, placodonts displayed subtle social behaviors. Fossil evidence suggests that some species may have congregated in small groups, slowly moving across the seafloor together. While not as coordinated or fast-moving as schools of fish, these groups provided safety in numbers and a shared rhythm to life in the Triassic seas. The placodonts' evolutionary story is remarkable. Though they were fully marine, they carried traits from their land-dwelling ancestors: strong jaws, sturdy limbs, and a body plan capable of resisting the pull of gravity on land. Over generations, these traits were refined for life in the water. Limbs became more paddle-like, bodies more streamlined, and shells more protective. Each adaptation was a step toward mastering a world that demanded both resilience and subtlety. To imagine a placodont in its natural habitat is to imagine a slow, deliberate grace. A wide, armored body glides through the shallow lagoon, sunlight glinting off its plates. Tentacles of small mollusks sway gently in the water currents. A fish school shimmers nearby, aware of its predator, yet unharmed. The placodont pauses, uses its flat teeth to crush a clam, then moves onward, leaving ripples in the sand and a trace of calm presence in its environment. In this chapter of life, the seas were not ruled by speed or violence alone. They were shaped by patience, adaptation, and the quiet persistence of creatures like the placodonts. They remind us that evolution favors not just the swift, but also the steady. Not just the powerful, but also the careful and observant. And so, the curious placodont's continued their lives in the Triassic seas, grazing, observing, surviving. They were a bridge between the timid reptiles of the past and the giants of the future, showing that the path to dominance could be measured, deliberate, and astonishingly effective. In the gentle shimmer of Triassic waters, amidst coral-like reefs and the dance of sunlight on the sandy floor, placodonts carved out a life that was slow yet enduring. Their story may not be as dramatic as the chase of a nothosaur or the strike of a later plesiosaur, but it is no less remarkable. In their patience and persistence, we see the quiet beginning of the ocean's grand story, a story that will eventually give rise to the giants of the deep. As the placodonts grazed patiently along reefs, another group of marine reptiles began to explore the seas in a very different way. The nothosaurs were the first true hunters of the shallow waters, swift, elegant, and remarkably adaptable. While placodonts moved slowly, conserving energy and relying on armor, nothosaurs were built for precision, patience, and the thrill of the chase. Imagine the Triassic lagoons and shallow reefs, sunlight filtering through the water, casting flickering patterns on the sandy floor. Schools of small fish shimmer like living jewels. In this sparkling underwater world, a long-necked, slender reptile glides silently, barely disturbing the currents. This is a nothosaur, its body streamlined, limbs shaped into paddles that allow for smooth, gliding motion. Its long neck stretches forward, jaw poised, ready to snap at a fish that ventures too close. Nothosaurs were true innovators in swimming. Unlike the heavy placodonts, they relied on lateral movement of their paddles combined with subtle tail motions to propel themselves gracefully. Their hunting style was precise. They would drift slowly, stalking prey, then strike with sudden bursts of speed. Their conical teeth, sharp and well-suited for gripping slippery fish, made them lethal hunters despite their modest size compared to future marine giants. But nothosaurs were not reckless. They understood the rhythms of the shallow seas. Currents guided them silently across lagoons, and tides revealed feeding grounds rich with schools of fish and cephalopods. Rocks, reefs, and algae provided cover, allowing these hunters to approach unnoticed. A nothosaur could linger for minutes, sometimes hours, waiting for the perfect moment, teaching us that in the ocean, patience was as powerful a weapon as speed or strength. Their lives were intertwined with the broader ecosystem. While they hunted, placodonts grazed nearby, armored shells providing a sense of safety for smaller creatures. Tiny fish learned the signs of a nothosaur's presence: a subtle shadow, a ripple in the water, the quiet approach of a predator. Over time, the interplay between hunter and prey shaped the behavior and even the form of the creatures in these waters, a subtle dance of adaptation and survival. Nothosaurs were also versatile. Fossil evidence suggests some could leave the water to bask in the sun, their long bodies sprawled across shallow sandbanks. Limbs, while primarily adapted for swimming, still allowed for brief excursions onto land. These excursions may have been for warmth, mating, or rest, gentle interludes in a life dominated by hunting and gliding through the waves. Juveniles learned quickly. Even the smallest nothosaurs practiced the art of swimming, chasing tiny prey and mimicking the movements of their elders. Currents carried them, teaching balance and coordination, while reefs offered shelter and protection. In this careful education, life prepared them for survival in a world where speed, observation, and timing were everything. To witness a nothosaur in its natural habitat is to see the elegance of early marine hunting. A long, sinuous neck drifts slowly above a school of fish. Eyes, large and keen, track the movements below. Then, with a sudden flick of paddles and a swift motion of the body, it strikes, jaws closing on its quarry before the water even ripples in response. The hunt is brief, efficient, and graceful, leaving both predator and prey as participants in the ongoing rhythm of life. Nothosaurs represent a pivotal moment in the ocean's history. They were not yet giants, but they were the first to truly dominate their niche. They were teachers in motion, showing how the combination of body, environment, and intelligence could create a predator that shaped entire ecosystems. Their presence influenced the evolution of fish, mollusks, and even other reptiles, setting the stage for the rise of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and pliosaurs. In the quiet, sunlit shallows of the Triassic, the first hunters of the seas carved out a life of elegance and skill. Their story is one of innovation, adaptation, and the beginnings of mastery over the ocean environment. Though they were modest in size compared to the giants yet to come, their legacy is profound. The art of hunting, gliding, and surviving in the water would echo through millions of years of marine evolution. And so, as the currents flowed, carrying nutrients and lessons alike, the nothosaurs moved with purpose. Each stroke of a paddle, each precise strike of a jaw, was part of a story that had only just begun. The story of the ancient giants that would one day rise to command the oceans with power, grace, and majesty. As the Triassic seas continued to awaken, a new type of marine reptile began to emerge. One built not for grazing or careful stalking, but for speed, precision, and endless movement. These were the ichthyosaurs, the dolphins of the Mesozoic oceans, sleek hunters that embodied elegance and efficiency in the water. Imagine the open waters beyond the shallow lagoons. Sunlight streams down, scattering across waves and depths. Currents flow steadily, carrying tiny fish, cephalopods, and plankton through the vast expanse. In this ever-moving environment, the ichthyosaurs glide effortlessly, bodies streamlined like arrows, fins and tail moving in perfect rhythm to propel them forward with astonishing speed. Unlike the earlier nothosaurs, ichthyosaurs were fully adapted to life in the open ocean. Their bodies were long and torpedo-shaped, perfectly suited for cutting through water with minimal resistance. A dorsal fin stabilized their movement, while a powerful crescent-shaped tail provided bursts of propulsion unmatched by any other marine reptile of the time. Every muscle, every fin, every streamlined contour was shaped by evolution to maximize efficiency and speed. Ichthyosaurs were hunters of precision. Their large eyes, some of the largest of any vertebrate relative to body size, allowed them to see in dim waters, detecting movement from afar. Squid, fish, and even small crustaceans became their prey as they glided silently, sometimes chasing in high-speed bursts, other times waiting patiently before striking with swift, decisive action. Their jaws were lined with conical teeth, perfectly suited to gripping slippery prey, a tool honed for millions of years of adaptation. The life of an ichthyosaur was one of rhythm. They rarely paused, moving with a constant, flowing motion that mirrored the currents and tides. They were migratory creatures, traveling long distances across oceans in search of food and favorable waters. Fossil evidence suggests they may have followed seasonal patterns, moving between breeding grounds and feeding areas much like modern whales and dolphins. Juvenile ichthyosaurs learned quickly. From the moment they were born, often tail first, an adaptation to prevent drowning, they practiced swimming, following currents, and chasing small prey. Their mothers guided them in the early stages, providing safety, direction, and instruction in the art of survival in open waters. Every dive, every flick of the tail, was a lesson in endurance and skill. Despite their speed, ichthyosaurs were also social in some ways. Fossilized remains sometimes suggest the presence of groups traveling together, perhaps for mating, protection, or hunting. Schools of fish reacted to their approach with instinctive precision, creating a constant, delicate dance between predator and prey. This rhythm, though unseen by human eyes, was the essence of life in the Triassic oceans, a quiet orchestration of motion, energy, and adaptation. Environmental changes shaped them as well. Warm shallow seas provided nurseries for the young, while deeper channels offered hunting grounds for adults. Currents brought nutrients and prey, guiding movements and shaping patterns of behavior. Storms and tides tested endurance, teaching patience and resilience. In every challenge, ichthyosaurs adapted, refined, and thrived. To witness an ichthyosaur in motion is to see the poetry of evolution. A sleek, elongated body slices through the water. A powerful tail flick propels it forward. Eyes, keen and unblinking, search for movement below. Then, in a flash, the jaws snap around a squid or small fish, the hunt over in seconds, leaving the ichthyosaur gliding gracefully once more, almost as if it had never moved at all. Ichthyosaurs represent a turning point in the ocean story. They were not the first marine reptiles, but they were pioneers of the open seas. Their mastery of speed, endurance, and precision set the stage for the later dominance of even larger predators, the plesiosaurs, pliosaurs, and mosasaurs, while also demonstrating that life could thrive in the open waters far from reefs and shores. And so, as the Triassic gave way to the Jurassic, ichthyosaurs continued their relentless patrol of the seas. With every glide, every dive, every hunt, they embodied the elegance of movement, the poetry of adaptation, and the quiet mastery of a world that was vast, deep, and endlessly alive. The oceans had found their dancers, their hunters, their masters of speed, creatures that would inspire awe for millions of years to come. By the middle of the Triassic and into the Jurassic, the ichthyosaurs had claimed their throne. No longer small newcomers at the edges of the seas, they now ruled the open waters with size, speed, and confidence. Some species remained small, darting hunters that chased schools of fish with sudden bursts of motion. But others had grown into giants. Among them was Shawnosaurus, a creature that stretched nearly as long as a modern bus. Its body was vast yet streamlined, its long jaws filled with simple conical teeth that gripped slippery prey. With eyes larger than a man's head, it peered into the dim blue of the ocean, seeing what few others could. To witness a group of Shawnosaurus swimming together must have been breathtaking. Imagine vast, silent shapes moving in unison, their crescent tails sweeping rhythmically, their sleek bodies vanishing into the haze of the deep. They were not solitary hunters. Evidence suggests some may have lived in groups, much like whales do today, traveling long distances across ancient seas. The ichthyosaurs were also remarkable parents. Fossils reveal females preserved in the very act of giving birth, their tiny offspring emerging tail first, safe from drowning. In this, they mirrored the whales of our modern world, raising young entirely in the ocean, teaching them to swim and hunt from their very first moments of life. At their peak, ichthyosaurs spread across the globe. From the shallow seas of Europe to the deep waters of what is now North America, they were everywhere. Their forms varied, some with long, slender jaws perfect for catching fish, others with shorter, sturdier skulls for cracking tougher prey. Each niche, each role in the ecosystem, was filled by one or another of their kind. For millions of years, they seemed unstoppable. They were the masters of speed, the visionaries of the deep, and the giants of their age. But even the greatest reigns do not last forever. Though they flourished through the Triassic and early Jurassic, shadows of change were already on the horizon. Other reptiles were rising, with new shapes, new strategies, and new claims on the seas. The ichthyosaurs had reached their apex, but the story of the oceans was not finished. As the ichthyosaurs reached the heights of their power, a new kind of marine reptile began to emerge, one that would redefine elegance and endurance in the seas. These were the plesiosaurs, born from the nothosaurs but perfected for life entirely in the water. Plesiosaurs came in two main forms. Some had long, sinuous necks, slender and sweeping like ribbons through the waves. At the end of each neck was a small, pointed head, perfect for snatching fish or squid with precise, darting strikes. These were the elasmosaurs, gentle giants that glided through the water with quiet patience. Others had shorter, powerful necks and massive skulls, designed for crushing and tearing. These were the pliosaurs, the apex predators of the deep, capable of rivaling any ichthyosaur in strength and size. Their four flippers, large and steady, allowed them to fly underwater with a grace that belied their bulk. To observe a plesiosaur moving through the ocean was to watch poetry in motion. Unlike the side-to-side swimming of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs propelled themselves with all four flippers, a technique that gave them surprising maneuverability. They could hover, pivot, and strike with precision, stalking prey in ways few other creatures could. These reptiles were fully marine. They no longer needed to haul themselves onto beaches, nor lay eggs on land. Their lives were spent entirely in the oceans, from birth to the end of their long, fluid lives. In a sense, they had become the true children of the sea, graceful, mysterious, and enduring. Some species grew to massive sizes. Imagine a long-necked elasmosaur, its body as long as a small bus, neck curving like a living bridge, gliding silently above a reef. Schools of fish scatter in its shadow. A short-necked plesiosaur emerges from the depths, jaws snapping at a struggling ammonite. These were creatures perfectly adapted to a world of water, light, and motion. The plesiosaurs were also creatures of patience. They could linger for hours in quiet waters, waiting for the right moment to strike, or glide for miles across open seas with almost no effort. Their lives were a dance of survival, hunting, and sometimes even subtle social interaction. In the story of marine reptiles, the plesiosaurs represent a turning point. They were not just survivors. They were masters, inventors of new ways to live, swim, and hunt. In their long necks and steady flippers, in their quiet dominance of oceans near and far, we see the next great chapter of life under the waves, a chapter that would last for tens of millions of years. In the deep waters of the Jurassic and Cretaceous seas, the oceans had room for giants. Among the plesiosaurs, one lineage grew into monsters of power and precision, the pliosaurs. Unlike their long-necked relatives, the pliosaurs had short, massive necks and enormous heads, armed with jaws capable of crushing prey with terrifying force. Their teeth were long and conical, perfect for gripping slippery fish, squid, or even smaller marine reptiles. These were the rulers of the deep, apex predators that few creatures dared to challenge. Imagine the colossal Kronosaurus, stretching over 10 meters, moving silently beneath the waves. Its 4 flippers propelled it with remarkable agility, while its jaws could snap through the hardest shells or crush bone with ease. Or consider Liopleurodon, whose reputation for size and strength has echoed through history, inspiring legends of oceanic monsters. The pliosaurs were not merely strong. They were intelligent hunters. They could ambush prey from below, glide through the water with precision, and strike with timing honed over millions of years of evolution. Their presence shaped the behavior of other marine creatures. Schools of fish scattered at the faintest shadow, cephalopods hid in crevices, and smaller reptiles avoided certain hunting grounds altogether. Despite their fearsome power, pliosaurs were also creatures of the sea. They swam across open oceans, sometimes covering vast distances, silently patrolling their territory. Their lives were full of rhythm, hunting, migrating, resting, and reproducing in a cycle perfected over millions of years. For millions of years, they dominated the oceans, unmatched in size and skill. Yet even giants must face change. Other marine reptiles were rising, ecosystems shifted, and the sands of time were slowly gathering to mark the end of their reign. In the pliosaurs, we see the epitome of evolution's artistry, strength, speed, and mastery of the oceans all in one magnificent form. They were the rulers of the deep, the silent hunters, and the ultimate predators of their age. The oceans of the late Cretaceous were changing. The age of ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs was fading, and a new group of marine reptiles was rising, the mosasaurs. Descendants of monitor lizard-like ancestors that returned to the sea, they were perfectly adapted to dominate the final chapter of the Mesozoic oceans. Mosasaurs were enormous, often exceeding 15 meters in length. Their long, powerful bodies were propelled by strong, paddle-like limbs and a tail fin, giving them the speed and maneuverability to hunt almost anything that swam. Their jaws were lined with sharp, curved teeth capable of seizing prey as large as turtles, fish, and even smaller marine reptiles. Unlike many earlier marine reptiles, mosasaurs were fully adapted to life in the deep ocean. They gave birth to live young, swam across vast distances, and hunted both near the surface and in the deeper waters. Fossil evidence shows them inhabiting every corner of the world's seas, from the shallow epicontinental seas of Europe to the tropical waters of what is now North America. Among the most famous were Mosasaurus, the archetype of the group, and Tylosaurus, a massive predator that could rival the largest pliosaurs in size and ferocity. Watching one of these creatures glide silently through the water must have been awe-inspiring, a living shadow that carried power, grace, and dominance in equal measure. The mosasaurs were the last true kings of the Mesozoic oceans. Their reign would last until the very end of the Cretaceous, when the asteroid impact changed the world forever. But for tens of millions of years, they were unmatched, shaping marine ecosystems and commanding respect from all who shared their waters. In them, evolution had perfected speed, strength, and predatory skill. They were living symbols of adaptation, the final chapter in a story that had begun with timid reptiles at the shoreline millions of years earlier. The oceans of the Mesozoic were alive with rhythm and motion, a quiet ballet beneath the waves. From the shallow reefs to the deep open seas, countless creatures lived, hunted, and thrived, each playing its part in a delicate web of life. Fish darted in schools, their silvery bodies flickering like sunlight on the water's surface. Ammonites, with their spiral shells, drifted gracefully in the currents, feeding on tiny plankton while avoiding predators. Mollusks and shellfish clung to reefs, providing food for the creatures that prowled nearby. Above all moved the marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs, each a specialist in its niche. The ichthyosaurs sliced through open waters with speed and precision, hunting fish and squid. The long-necked plesiosaurs hovered above reefs, stalking prey with patient grace. The plesiosaurs patrolled the depths, their jaws capable of crushing anything that crossed their path. And the mosasaurs, kings of the late Cretaceous, ruled both near the surface and in deeper waters, hunting with unmatched power. Despite their size and skill, these creatures were part of a larger world. Tiny crustaceans and plankton supported the food chain. Reefs teemed with life, providing shelter and sustenance. The balance was fragile. Every predator relied on prey, every species on the health of its environment. Life in the Mesozoic oceans was also a story of movement and migration. Some reptiles traveled vast distances in search of food or breeding grounds. Others patrolled familiar territories, establishing boundaries that were respected by rivals. And all of them, from the smallest fish to the largest plesiosaur, were part of a world that had evolved over millions of years into a complex, thriving ecosystem. The seas were not silent. There was the rush of water against scales, the flick of tails, the snap of jaws, and the quiet hum of life that continued uninterrupted for millions of years. It was a world both alien and familiar, a reminder that life adapts, survives, and flourishes in endless forms. In these ancient oceans, we see the story of life itself, patient, persistent, and endlessly inventive. It is a story that continues, long after the giants have vanished, in every fish that glides through our modern seas. Life in the oceans was not only a story of hunting and swimming. It was also a story of growth, survival, and the delicate art of bringing the next generation into the world. Marine reptiles faced unique challenges. Unlike most land-dwelling reptiles, many could not lay eggs on dry land. The ichthyosaurs, for example, had fully embraced the sea, giving birth to live young. Fossil evidence shows tiny ichthyosaurs emerging tail-first into the water, a careful adaptation to prevent drowning. The mothers guided them through the first moments of life, teaching them to swim, hunt, and avoid predators. The plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, too, were fully aquatic. Some scientists believe they may have laid eggs on remote beaches or given live birth in the water, though the details remain one of nature's enduring mysteries. What is certain is that their young had to grow quickly, learning the rhythms of hunting, swimming, and survival from the moment they entered the sea. For every predator in the ocean, there were challenges. Strong currents, storms, and competition made life precarious. A juvenile plesiosaur or mosasaur had to avoid older, larger predators while learning to catch its own meals. Many did not survive, as is the way of the natural world, but those that did carried forward the legacy of millions of years of adaptation. Growth in these giants was steady and persistent. The largest ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs required decades to reach full size, yet every year brought new skills, sharper reflexes, and greater strength. Reproduction and survival were intertwined. The better a species adapted to its environment, the more likely it was to pass on its traits to the next generation. And so, The oceans were a classroom of evolution. Life taught itself to swim faster, hunt smarter, and endure longer. Each generation grew stronger, more specialized, and more attuned to the rhythms of the seas. In observing this, we see a lesson that echoes beyond time. Life thrives not only through power, but through adaptation, patience, and care. The giants of the Mesozoic oceans were not just hunters, they were teachers of survival, guiding their young through a world as beautiful as it was unforgiving. Even after millions of years, the presence of marine reptiles did not fade entirely. Their bones, buried deep in stone, awaited discovery by humans, who would look upon them and wonder. Fossils of enormous jaws, long necks, and massive teeth inspired tales that stretched across cultures and centuries. In many coastal communities, legends told of sea serpents and mysterious leviathans lurking in the deep. Perhaps they were inspired by the long-necked plesiosaurs, their curved necks imagined as snakes sliding across the waves. Or the enormous jaws of mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, once dug from the earth, became the teeth of monsters that haunted sailors' nightmares. Even early scientists struggled to understand what these fossils revealed. Before the age of paleontology, a giant tooth or bone might be called a dragon's remnant, a giant fish, or a monster of the deep. Mistakes were made, but they were part of the journey, the first attempts to unravel the mysteries of life long gone. Over time, knowledge grew. Paleontologists began to reconstruct these creatures, revealing not monsters of myth, but real animals that had once ruled the oceans. Yet the legends never disappeared. Tales of krakens, sea serpents, and enormous monsters owe much to the fossils of ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs. In this way, marine reptiles became more than animals. They became symbols of wonder, mystery, and the power of nature. Even today, when we see a long-necked plesiosaur or a towering mosasaur reconstructed in a museum, we feel a shiver of awe, a reminder of the world that existed long before us, and the stories it inspired. Their bones are quiet teachers. They speak of life, survival, and imagination. They remind us that even in death, creatures can shape the way we see the world, inspiring myths that blend curiosity, fear, and fascination. Even the mightiest rulers must one day face change. The oceans that had once been filled with ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs were not eternal kingdoms. Over millions of years, shifts in climate, sea levels, and ecosystems slowly reshaped the marine world. Some groups, like the ichthyosaurs, began to decline long before the final cataclysm. Competition, changing prey populations, and evolving ecosystems reduced their numbers. Yet they had ruled for millions of years, leaving a legacy of adaptation and mastery. The mosasaurs and plesiosaurs held on longer, dominating the late Cretaceous seas. But even they were vulnerable. The oceans were changing. Warm shallow seas gave way to cooler currents, and ecosystems slowly transformed. Predators and prey adapted, and new challenges arose that even giants could not fully meet. Then came the cataclysm, the asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous. In an instant, the world changed. Fires, tsunamis, and darkness swept across the planet. The delicate balance of marine ecosystems collapsed. Even the largest and most powerful reptiles could not survive the sudden devastation. And so, the great ocean giants vanished. Their reign, which had lasted for tens of millions of years, came to a quiet, final close. The seas grew still in ways they had not known since the earliest days of the Triassic. Yet their story did not vanish entirely. Fossils preserved in stone tell of their grandeur. Their bones whisper of speed, power, and elegance. Their lives, though ended, continue to inspire awe, reminding us of a time when giants ruled beneath the waves, and life thrived in endless variety. The fall of the ocean giants was not just an end, it was a turning point. It allowed new creatures to rise, including the ancestors of modern marine life, and it left a world that, though changed, carried the echoes of its ancient rulers. The oceans are quieter now. The great ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs are gone, Their bodies returned to stone and memory. Yet their story has not ended. Through their lives, these ancient giants shaped marine ecosystems. They influenced the evolution of other animals, from fish to smaller marine reptiles, and left patterns of adaptation that echo in the creatures of today. The speed of dolphins, the hunting strategies of sharks, and even the migration of whales carry whispers of lessons learned long ago. Their fossils, scattered across continents, tell tales of a world both alien and familiar. They remind us of evolution's patience, of life's persistence, and of the beauty of adaptation. Every discovery, a bone, a tooth, or a fossilized embryo, is a window into oceans that existed hundreds of millions of years before humans walked the earth. And in human imagination, they endure still. Long-necked plesiosaurs became sea monsters in stories. Massive mosasaurs inspired awe and fear. Through myths, art, and science, they continue to teach us about wonder, curiosity, and the enduring power of nature. As we close this story, we remember that the giants of the ancient oceans were more than predators or survivors. They were pioneers, inventors of new ways to live, swim, and thrive. They were teachers, showing us the rhythms of life, the importance of adaptation, and the beauty of the unseen worlds beneath the waves. Even in their absence, they remain present, in the quiet of the oceans, in the fossilized bones that speak across time, and in the imagination of anyone who looks to the deep and wonders what once swam there. The ancient giants have passed, but their legacy endures, a calm reminder that life is ever-changing, ever-adapting, and endlessly remarkable.